is equipment provision for plus size individuals. So this should be an interesting presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing. We've got Anita Rush on the call today, an expert in that field, so very much looking forward to it. My name's George Hulbert. I'm the sales director here at Yorkshire Care Equipment. And just a little bit about ourselves, who we are. So we've been established now for nearly 50 years, so 50th birthday next year, which is exciting. And really our mission is to enhance quality of life. So it's really important to us, as it is for all of you on the call, to really enhance somebody's quality of life in all that we do. So equipment that we provide and service that we deliver. And we've been associated with quite a number of healthcare professionals now over many, many years. We do a lot of joint equipment assessments, either virtually or in the field, meeting up with professionals such as yourselves. Really, seating is our speciality. That's what we've built the business up on. So in terms of, anything from a dining or high seat chair, right the way through to a rise and recline chair, and then to the world of care chairs, the tilting space care chairs. But really, in order to point out what makes our seating so special, we've tried to take a step back, really, particularly over the last 5 or 10 years, and where something's perhaps become the norm, challenge it. So it's really important for us to make our seating as modular and reusable as possible. Important where possible to make one size fits all. We appreciate that isn't always the case. There's a large spectrum of clients, types and conditions, different heights and weights, but where possible, make it as adjustable as possible to make it being able to use with as many patients as possible. So whereabouts do our chairs go? You'll see there from a few different marketplaces. So hospital, the acute side, social care, we do hospices, and of course to private individuals in their own homes. So our seating is going into a variety of different areas, and all over the UK and beyond. We've had quite a lot of international inquiries more recently, and it's really exciting to be able to deliver some of our chairs over to the reaches of the Americas and Australia and so on, and of course assist people in their setup with the video technology, which has kind of been thrust upon us. So moving on to why the need for plus size equipment. Well, it really jumped out at me as I looked at these slides as to, quite shocked actually, the proportion of people which are, we can see on the left hand side, 280 out of every 1,000 adults being obese, and 33 of those morbidly obese. And then we'll see over on the right hand side there that the level of obesity, that's just a snapshot from 93 to 2019, has nearly doubled. So we can see that, I was going to say a growing problem, excuse a pun, but we can see that it is something which is increasing. So just to touch on one or two products, just like to put in front of you all in terms of a bed which our group have recently delivered to the marketplace. So this is Nova Care Concepts, one of our sister companies. This is a hospital bed which is expandable in width at the press of a button. So, anything from your standard single right the way out to a true double size, and with a load capacity of half a metric ton, which is very impressive, and can go right down to as low as 20 centimeters from the floor. So really catering for a lot more of that type of patient type than beds have previously been able to do. And extendable in length as well. So you'll see that down below, a 10 centimeter increase in length available. Another piece of equipment just to put in front of you here is one of the Vela chairs made over in Scandinavia. So this has got a 300 kg weight limit. They're very multi-purpose. You'll see looks very much like an office chair, but it's what we refer to as an activity chair. So very, very functional, and you'll see that it's on wheels there with a brake. In terms of carrying out daily activities, it can be a real change to a patient's life, really, being able to carry out normal day-to-day activities with this piece of equipment. And then lastly, which I will give you a live presentation on, is our brand new Lento Bariatric Rise and Recline chair. So we're very excited about this. We launched it in September at the National Back Exchange. We do believe it's the world's first fully adjustable bariatric chair. I'll run over the amount of adjustment it has and the action type as well. Comes with a 50 stone weight limit, 25 stone weight limit on the leg rest, and very ideal for infection control. So when put into the acute environment, I should really mention at this stage to please use the chat. Pop in any questions you've got, both on this chair and importantly on the slides, which we're going to go through shortly by Anita. Just keep those questions feeding through, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. And in terms of this webinar, we're very pleased to say that we've had 584 attendees. So thank you everybody for sparing your time, and we trust this will be worthwhile for you. So I will be back with you in about a minute or two. I'm just transferring now from the office to our assessment showroom, and you'll see me there with a chair. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that wait. So this is the chair, the Lento adjustable bariatric rise and recline chair. So what I'd really, maybe just to give a little bit of background, what we've been doing in the last few months since we launched it at the National Back Exchange, is we've been going around quite a number of hospitals and gaining feedback. That's key. You are the professionals, you know what's needed best, and we want to adapt and tweak this as we go on. So I'll run through the functions and features. Please feel free to drop questions on the chat, suggestions on, and I'll also run over what professionals have already said this chair needs in terms of extras. So I'm going to start first of all by touching on the adjustment of the chair. So why the adjustment? And I think others will be able to really touch on this more, but particularly when we're dealing with bariatric patients, weights do tend to fluctuate both ways quite considerably. So where before we've maybe had fixed width chairs, and then it means having to upgrade to another chair, or try and use spacers to adapt. Well, we've got adjustable width here, so don't know whether it's clear to you. I'll do it from both armrests. You'll see that we can adjust that there from 28 out to 32 inches. So really easy adjustment. We've got a little screw knob on the underside of the chair here. We can undo that, and that allows us just to really easily adjust the width of the chair. While I'm doing that, just as regards the armrests, you'll see here that where my fingers are, we've got a couple of pull pins. So I can adjust the armrests if that facilitates with transfer, but also to adjust the armrest height. So we can adjust that from 6 up to 9 inches. So again, with our the subject of this webinar, we sometimes find that due to their body physique and size, that we do need to have a higher arm height than standard to give more support. That just simply slides back in there. So seat width, arm height. In terms of the seat depth, again, apologies if this is not too clear to everybody, but I'll try and point, what we've got here is we've got a screw knob either side of the backrest, and we've got a series of holes either side of that. So I can adjust the seat depth, so by taking out the two screw knobs from 18 right the way back to 22 inches. So that's a really simple operation, just adjusting the knob, placing it in another hole, and that adjusts the seat depth of the chair. Now, as regards the seat height, I'll point to what doesn't normally come on the chair, and these are on height adjustable legs. We're going to put the chair on brake casters as standard. That came back feedback as we're going around the hospitals. I think that's important so they can move the chairs bay to bay. That's not to advocate pushing a client in the chair. That's just maneuvering the chair around. So this is just purely from us transporting it around. We have a little forklift and that's why it's on these legs. But in terms of the actual adjustment in height, that's controlled from the handset. So with me pressing the rise and the tilt buttons at the same time, you'll see the whole chair rising up vertically. And then conversely, if I do the bottom two buttons, so we can adjust that up and down in order to get some good seat height adjustment there. And then lastly, in terms of the backrest height, so if you've got a tall user, this backrest cushion here has got little cutout on each corner just to fit snugly over the lateral support there. If we turn this round, we can increase the back height by 4 inches there, so for your taller users. So just to really sum that up, seat width, seat depth, arm height, seat height, and back height. So 5 levels of adjustment, which is really important to really fulfill the client's long-term needs, have a chair which will follow them all the way through. So moving on to the action of the chair, probably unclear for you here on the screen, but we've got individual backrest adjustment. So that will take the back, forward, individual leg rest adjustment. So the leg rest coming out here. And that's really important for these patient types in that they can't tolerate, sorry, I don't really sound like the expert here. So Anita, please challenge anything that I say incorrectly when it gets to your slide. But in terms of positioning for the client, often, you know, the backrest will need to be in quite an upright position, so there's not too much pressure. It can really vary, and they need this individual level of adjustment. So to tweak the backrest, to tweak the leg rest, they may only be able to tolerate a certain amount of leg rest elevation. And then we've got the whole chair in a tilt in space action, which of course is really important to distribute pressure more evenly throughout the chair. So when we're in a normal sitting position, 80% of our weight is going through our bottom, 20% through our feet. If we can use a tilt in space, that then means our head and shoulders, we're distributing our body weight more evenly. So that's really important there. If I just at this stage take the backrest back and bring the leg rest all the way up, you'll see that we can achieve nearly a horizontal position, which if the client needs to rest or they need to, this is to assist the staff in terms of maybe a procedure or perhaps a minor operation, that can be really helped there. Now, what we find with rise and recline chairs is typically as caregivers, we're having to lean over to the patient. So to combat that, and just going back to what I said at the beginning about pressing the 2 buttons, so the rise and tilt at the same time, the chair can now come up vertically. And that's really important in terms of me being able to offer care and working at a good height there. We've got about 10 inches of rise. So if I just bring that back into the standard position, that's just another function I want to run over. So I'm just going to bring that down to the floor now. What I want to illustrate is that how it can be used in a rehab setting. So might be somebody who's recently had surgery, and it's important about getting them back on the feet again. So going back to these two buttons again, the rise and the tilt, we can use those so we can perform like a graded sit to stand. So it might be that we do a little bit of tilt forward, and then we can tilt and rise, so to assist them in getting out the chair, and that can be stopped at any point, but it can take you more or less to a full sit to stand. So from a rehab perspective as well, that works particularly well. So in terms of infection control, which is really important in terms of the cleaning of the chair, you'll notice that I usually remove the cushion, which is on press studs. The same goes for all three cushions. So that's very, very straightforward and easy to do. As is the seat cushion. So the seat and leg rest wrap with the cushion underneath, that all removes by press stud. We know that the arms can just simply remove off as well. So we can strip the chair back pretty much to bare bones in order to give it a real good and thorough clean. Something else which has been mentioned while we've been in the hospitals is the glued and heat sealed seams. So that's something that we would look to include. And then there was also conflicting opinions, but on a footrest, and I'd be interested to hear your viewpoints on this as to whether or not a footrest would be needed. My only slight reservation is that when you've got a rise and recline chair and using it with a leg rest, which of course has to be removed before utilizing the rise function, is that there's a good level of care needed by the carers to ensure its removal before it folding up and inevitably crushing or catching on the floor. In terms of the comfort of the chair, so we've got the black material, the Dartex, running all the way through the middle of the chair and also on the armrests as well. So a four-way stretch material. So the foam below more easily conforms to somebody's body contour. And of course, it's a waterproof and breathable material. So particularly for our patients, this chair is for that. With it being breathable, it's just going to control their body temperature and their comfort better. In this particular chair, we've got gel here. I don't know whether you can see the pimples just along there, but gel in the seat and the leg rest. So it can either come with visco foam or gel. Our preference, it is more obviously in terms of cost, but our preference is gel. You'll find for these patients are maybe sitting longer in the chair, so it's important that we don't put them at risk. And then we've got a good thick leg rest pad here to support. You've got the little lateral wings here, which is non-aggressive lateral, but it just gently hugs you at your core there. So if somebody does have a weakness to one side, it's just going to give them a little bit more support in terms of their keeping a good in-line posture there. So for fear of repeating myself and moving on to the main part of the presentation, I'll stop there. But if you've got any questions, feed them in. Yeah, any suggestions in terms of particularly in a acute or community environment would be welcome. I have just seen something pop up there in terms of cost, so I'll just cover that before we move on. So we're talking, if you would look at this chair exactly as it is, so with the casters, the heat sealing of the seams, that kind of thing, to get into an acute environment successfully, I think you'd be talking around about the £6,500 to £7,000, just to give you an indication there in terms of cost, obviously subject to exactly what maybe accessories or specification you go for. So 50 stone weight limit and 25 stone on the leg rest. So at that, I will move on now to the main part of the presentation. So over to you. Thank you.
Right, okay. Right, good afternoon, everybody. How are you all? That was a very interesting presentation, wasn't it? And I found some key points there that I found very interesting. So thank you for coming today to this presentation. And it's always difficult when you're asked to do a plus size presentation, because it can become very repetitive. So when I spoke to Tristan about what to do today, I thought of something a bit about equipment and equipment mismatch, and how we can coordinate our equipment provision to individuals within the community and the hospital. So I think the first question I'd like to ask, because I think today's session is very relevant with what today is. And how many of you know what today is? What is special about today for us within the NHS? Anybody know? Don't put it in the chat box, just shout it out. Anybody? No? Okay, well, today is November the 18th, is EPUA's Stop Pressure. So it's about tissue viability and it's about stopping pressure. And I think what has been presented so far on the attributes of the chair has been very interesting around pressure. And also I'm hoping that will bring some with this presentation I'm about to start. So for me, I'm just going to start the presentation. I'm looking at today's objectives. Now, throughout my career within doing plus size individuals, manual handling and assessments, I find that equipment is one of the biggest problems that we have, and working that in conjunction with environment and the individual themselves. And sometimes we have this equipment that we put in, and what it does, it becomes a mismatch, and we then are actually providing harm to the individual that we're trying to prevent and look after, both for the individual and the carers as well. So I'm hoping through effective assessment today that we will enable some harm-free care and also give you food for thought. So I'm going to talk about body shapes, and some of you might sigh and say, oh, she always does that. Yes, I do, but body shapes are one of the most important things in our assessments of our plus size individuals. Discuss a bit about equipment mismatch, and I've got lots of pictures in this presentation. I'm going to talk to you about a case study, and then we're going to look about circulation spate, and then tying in with the presentation we've just had, we're just going to go over the attributes of plus size seating. So I'm not going to go into this. We're going to look at Apple shared, Apple shapes, Android. So for me, with our Apple shapes, we have the, I'm not going to read all of this. I think you'll get the presentation. Am I not, is that correct, Tristan? Yes. So you'll get the presentation. What I would like to talk about is the Apple shape in regards to equipment. So we have our Apple shaped individual, and the biggest risk for our Apple shaped individual is if they are lying flat. When they lie flat, all of their organs are squashed by the weight bearing down on them, and they will start to find themselves become very breathless. So this apple-shaped person is a very complex, so are all shapes, but this one in particular, because of the way that we have to manage them within that sitting up position or with that partial sitting. We need to keep these tubes open. We need to keep their respiratory tubes all open. So we need to think about how we're going to do that. Appendicitis in the physical constraints Well, okay, the belly is actually high, it's rigid, it doesn't wander. We have limited trunk flexion. The hips and the knees are pretty good, but again, they're carrying a heavy weight, so there might be a lot of pain. I've already alluded to shortness of breath, poor supine and prone tolerance, and there is, like with most plus size shapes, this poor ambulation. Apollopanus. Now, Apollopanus is complex as well. Complex in the actual size of the panus, whether the panus has any protruding nodules hanging off of it, which adds to the weight of that. Now you look at the seating, the chair that's just been demonstrated. What would you consider when you are trying to sit this lady in a chair? For a start, you would have to consider the circulation. If you sit her down on a chair in bed, you're looking at the restrictions in the legs of the venous flows. So you've got to think of pieces of equipment that will able to lift that panus slightly up, maybe beaded cushions, maybe something a bit more solid than that. But we need to think about how we're going to keep that panus up. It was mentioned that the safe working load of the leg elevation on the chair was 25 stone. Is that correct? I got that correct. Yes. So 25 stone. So if you think that the weight of your legs, each leg is 15% of your body weight, and then you've got a heavy panus sitting on top of that, that all needs to be taken into the calculation of that piece of that seating that you are going to put in for that individual. And also the amount of pressure that is going through the sacrum. So with the Apollopanus, the panus will fill the lap. There is, as the patient is walking, that panus will swing. They do have good supine and prone positioning tolerance. So just food for thought on that one. Then we have the pair. We have the pear-shaped. We have pair abducted, and we have pair adducted. Abducted and adducted. Too close in pronunciation, those two. So again, the patient is pear-shaped. Now, the patient in this picture will always tell you that his chest was 16 inches smaller than from his waist downwards. He carries the weight down further in the body and by the hips. Sometimes this can be combined with a large panus, and sometimes the patient might not be able to see their feet. The pair abducted is where the weight allows weight below the waist, but on the outside of the thighs. So you've got weight at the tissue inside the thighs and the weight outside the thighs. And that makes a difference with elimination, because plus size people will find it difficult to eliminate and wipe themselves afterwards. So you're going to start looking at things like moisture lesions here. The physical constraints of our pear-shaped is the hip and knee flexion limited. Sitting is a big problem because most of our plus size people cannot bend their legs. Most of them will sit with their legs out splayed, and they will not be able to give you that nice sitting position that we're all hoping. The center of gravity actually is a bit more towards the knees, and they have a lot of difficulty in rolling. So again, these are all contraindications to the shapes. We have the shapes, but we also have proportionate, where the height, the width, and the person's weight is actually proportionate across their whole body. So they can be a mixture of apples and pears, and equally they can be just tall. And their mobility will be no different from those of all normal apples and pear people. This is one for me. It's the bulbous gluteal region. Now, this lady's bulbous gluteal region, when she was her biggest, if you got a tape measure, you would measure that at 51 inches wide. You can actually see from here, I don't know if you can see, this is her bottom, and all of this, when in seated, is her adipose tissue. And of course, when she stands, it becomes more compact, but when seated, we all know the tissue will spread. So what we're looking here is, how would you seat someone of this size? Well, probably we wouldn't be able to in a chair, and it would have to be on a bed. And in this situation, this plus size lady actually had a bed that was 5 foot wide due to the amount of tissue that needed to be accommodated. So what we did here was we risk assessed it, and it was agreed that she would be in bed 24/7. And that the partner would help with the assistance on and off the bed, because the width of the bed was a hazard to the carers due to the reach and stretch. So these are the things that we were thinking about when we actually ordered this piece of equipment. Physical constraints is, as I've already alluded to, is seating. Again, we need to think about the head support, because we know that you get a lot of fatigue if you don't have head support. So you need to be looking at how you're going to look at the waterfall back and see how you can adjust all those waterfall cushions to accommodate the gluteal shelves, and actually then accommodate the head so that they've got that relaxed seating in that chair. I have to add that this picture of this lady is not the picture of her when she was at the worst case scenario in the slide before. This is when I met her before she put on a lot more weight. So those are the two distinct differences there. So in preparing for this session, I thought, well, what is equipment mismatch? Well, what is mismatch? And it's something that's not correctly paired. It's a failure to correspond or match. It's a discrepancy. And with that correspondence to mismatch within the equipment provision world, we are actually increasing the risk of harm to both our individual and to the caregivers, or even to the individual's family. And it's quite interesting, because I did some research as well, and plus size equipment is often defined by its weight capacity and equal distribution of load across the equipment. In reality, is this right? When I've been working in practice on this, it is the variations of those patients' body shapes. It's the variation of that individual, the variation of their mobility. And we can start looking at things like the Flynn tool, or even the mobility galleries that are out there. And we need to look at using all of those within this assessment. So we've impacted body shapes, apple and pear, protruding selves. Where are we putting stresses on the equipment? I don't know if you can notice here on this picture here, what this leg support is doing to this individual's leg. I don't know, can you confirm for me, Tristan, that you can see where my arrows that I'm pointing? So I'm pointing here, yes. So here, has anyone picked up what damage is going on to this lady's leg with this metal that is digging into her legs? Also, what's happening here in this wheelchair is, where is her stability now? Where is this patient's stability? She's leaning back in the chair, and how many people would we need for her to circulate around this environment that she's in? You can see here that you've got protrusion of the body mass coming over the sides here, and her breathing is not particularly well accommodated due to the way that she's slanted in this chair. So we need to look at these components of the equipment, but we also need to look at the design and impact weight. So I don't know if you know what I'm talking about with impact weight, but plus size people do not sit down in chairs, in beds, wherever they are, gently. And there is some research that's been done on impact weight. And the impact weight of an individual, say myself or anybody else, now I weigh 10 stone. If I was to fall and drop, my impact weight then becomes 20 stone. So you now think about that impact weight on the equipment that you are actually now going to provide, because on a bed, on a chair is not quite so bad as a bed, because you can actually bring the chair up into a position where the controls will bring the patient down into seating. Whereas on a bed, if they can't get into it, they will fall into it. And those of you that have worn the empathy suits will understand what I'm talking about. It's not easy to get into bed. So what would you do if you came across pictures like this? Well, I didn't come across this picture. I actually took this picture, and I was asked to go and help this patient who, and I don't know if there's any nurses on this course, but you can see here, I'm not even going to comment on this, but do you think this is harm-free care? Do you think this is best practice by looking at this picture? If you look at where this arm is going into this patient's leg, and you can see that she's got a dressing on there already. So there's already damage under that leg. She's going to become fixed, and she was in this chair 24/7. So those legs will become fixed. And if those legs become fixed, then we're going to have further problems with trying to get this patient hoisted. So thinking about that, and in the question box, I would like to ask you, what would your thoughts be if you came into this patient? What would I know the perching saws and the cushions that she's on would actually not be good, because they are actually not got tissue viability properties. So we've got no pressure relief on these. We've got actual pressure going down underneath here, and we've got fixation of this leg. This one, the bed. I came across this in an acute hospital, and the staff were struggling to roll. Now, straight away, you could say, okay, we've got the bed rails up. If you look at the posture of this individual here, and you look at the posture of this person trying to put the sling in, there is equipment missing. There is sliding sheets or different ways of doing this. But what we're finding here is they need to roll this individual. Her abdomen is going to be up right against those bed rails. And I couldn't find the picture I wanted to show you of a plus size lady that I met in my years, where her weight was such that the mattress bottomed out underneath her. And when I went in to see the lady, she had the imprint of the base of the bed all along her back, down her legs to her feet. So the actual imprint, and where she had been rolled against the bed rails were actually indented marks on her abdomen. So again, we go back to harm-free care. What is the width, the height of the bed, and the safe working load? So all of these, when I'm talking about equipment not fit for purpose, none of this equipment that was put in this patient's home or in the hospital environment was fit for purpose. But people just managed. They just managed. They got on with it and managed. But that is, then you've got people going off sick with injuries. So we've got to think about it and remedy these mismatches of equipment. We also know that there are environmental constraints. We know that in our community homes, in some of our hospitals, care home settings, we don't have room. We don't have room for this large equipment. And funny enough, I was on LinkedIn last night and I was looking at something, and there was a company that came up with this plus size piece of equipment, and it was gigantic. And I was thinking, where would we be putting this within the individual's home? Who would we expect to manage this piece of equipment? How many people would we need? because sometimes the bigger the equipment, the more staff we need. So we've got the individual's risk of falls, we've got manual handling injuries to our care staff, and some of those can be serious injuries. We could have category 4, 5 tissue damage. We could actually have broken limbs. Plus size people aren't immune to having tissue damage and broken limbs, and equipment failure. And that is really important, because I know I preach about it all the time, but we need to think about safe working loads. So we're talking about the safe working load of a bed. So we know with the new bed rail guidance, the new bed guidance and everything, we now have to have the weight of the bed and the weight of the individual on that bed. But there are accessories. And I've got down here, example, Ventilette. So for me, how many of you know the weight of a Ventilette to when it's added, before you add it to a bed? And how many of you take that weight into consideration before you then take the weight of the individual? And a Ventilette weighs 7 stone. No, that's wrong. 7 pounds, sorry. No, 7 stone. No, it's right. Got that wrong, didn't I? So the Ventilette. So you're now going to have to reduce the weight of that patient's weight down to encompass the Ventilette, the weight of the bed, and any other accessories. So those are things that you need to think about as well. So if you are adding equipment to the bed, you then need to make sure that you are actually increasing the safe working load of the bed to add that extra equipment that you're putting on. So I thought to myself, well, what can we do to think about designing for safety? So this is a bit of a case study that I did, and I worked with a hoist company over this. And I learned so much from this company, I really did, over the years. So the patient's weight was 315 kilos. Patient was pear-shaped, lots of moisture lesion, and was bed-bound. Needed to come out of hospital, and we needed to put in a hoisting system so that she could be hoisted out of bed and into her chair. She was on continuous oxygen. So what happened here is that we had to do these measurements. So what we had to do was, first of all, because we needed to know what the ceiling, floor to ceiling height was. And we know that if a property has a ceiling height less than 2.4 meters, we need to confirm the functional lift height before installing the hoist. So what we needed to do is we needed to take the measurements from floor to ceiling. We then needed to look at the functional height of the bed, and we found that out from the supplier. So we knew the functional height of the bed was 559. And then we needed to take into account the sling. So we then had to think about the sling. Then we needed to, if ideally, is to hoist the patient in the sling to see what height we had. So from the patient, for a larger patient, we needed 1100 millimeters for the patient. Then we needed to think about the lift motor and its height from the ceiling. So all of these measurements had to be taken into account. We also needed to look at the body shape of that individual, because we needed to know where the spreader bars were. This was an H-frame. It was a dual motor hoist, and the height of those motors were all included in the sum. And also we needed to know which way round we wanted the spreader bars, whether we needed 2 wide spreader bars, or whether because of the body shape we had the widest at the front and the smallest at the back. Because what the last thing I wanted to do was squash this lady in the sling and then cause her breathlessness. So we had to work all of this out before we could actually install it, and also make sure that, that when she came home, we didn't have carers at risk where they couldn't get her off the bed, and they were having to push her, and she sustained tissue damage. So what we did here was, this is what we did. So as I said, measurement required floor to ceiling, and in this case it was 2,232 millimeters, and also the height of the lowest. We also needed to look at loop slings, and again to get their bottom clearance as to what loops we were, and the height of the motor. So you should be able to get all this information with actually working with the suppliers, the hoist installation. And you also need to consider the obstacles actually around, like the ceiling lights, sprinklers, emergency pool carriers, so that you can actually get that transverse of the rail being smooth, and that smooth transfer from the bed to chair. You would also need to take into account the chair height and the commode if you were actually going to put this patient onto a commode. I also want to talk to you just a bit here about slings. It's really difficult here with slings to some extent, because every sling manufacturer makes their slings different. At the moment, I'm working on a case where I've got an individual lady that wants to be out of bed in her chair. Now, we have the choice of in-chair slings, and we have the chair ordinary body slings. And running alongside that, you need to think about the amount of time you're doing a task. This particular lady I have at the moment, we tried several slings, and the only sling that worked was actually the in-chair sling, but she tipped sideways. Now, she slipped sideways a bit because the weight of her legs. So the reason the in-chair sling worked really well was there was a lot more material that we could get under the legs and we could straighten her. However, that increased the problem for the carers, because when she required toileting, they used to have to put her on the bed, sort out the slings, put her on the commode, take her back off the commode, put her on the bed, put her back in the right sling, and then put her into the chair that she was sitting in. And I just got an email today asking me to go back and reassess this, because it's taking so long for those tasks to be completed, and whether there is another chair, another sling that we could use that would manage all the tasks without having to change slings. So again, slings, hoists, got to work together. We know that, and I'm sure all of you as professional here are thinking, well, we know that, Anita, and I'm sure you do. But I just want to reiterate, with our plus size population, slings can cause tissue damage. They can actually, if the person's got very large legs, the slings, if they're not supporting the legs properly, will cut into the skin. And then we've got, and they will start hurting. And we can actually put people off from being hoisted, and they will say to us, I don't want to get out of bed, I don't want to be hoisted, it hurts to be hoisted. And then you have to start all over again to try and give them the confidence that yes, we can get you out, and you will be able to differentiate between night and day by getting out in the chair, and actually socializing as well. And alongside this, we need to look at the environment. And there's a lot of work being done about turning circles, number of carers required to maneuver equipment with that individual in there, the push-pull factors, you know, you're pushing, you're pulling those wheelchairs, your actual patient's center line of stability changes, so they are more at risk if they're not in the equipment appropriately, of tipping out or tipping back, causing injury to everyone. Door widths, I know they're building new houses with a bit wider door widths, but we still don't have the corridor. Access and egress, ramping. Ramping, again, are we expecting plus size individuals to push wheelchair up wraps where there's that mismatch, and also the flooring. What type of flooring do you have? Is it carpeted within the patient's home? And are we able to talk to them to change that flooring to make it easier? However, if we make it easier, some flooring then becomes more slippery, and that then becomes the hazard. So what we need to do is determine the space required. Now, there has been work done, and I'm not sure that I referenced it here, about turning circles and how we measure them. We did a workshop many years ago where we did the turning circles, and also we've got to look at our plus size carer population, because if you're providing care around the bed, you're using hoists, you're feeding, you're also going to have to think of the space that you require for a plus size carer, or because it will be more. So when you are actually looking at the environment, you are actually putting that bed in and that equipment in, you need to think about, well, okay, this is what is recommended, but we know that we have a population, it's already been alluded to with the slides that we have been given earlier on numbers, that our population is growing. And also we need to think about the equipment. So you've got a bed, commode, and maybe you don't always have the luxury of a fixed tracking system, so it might be a hoist as well. All of these we need to think about as we're looking after our population. And this is what I'm talking about here, is the ergonomic envelope. Okay, and this has been referenced, it's the HSC, it's Sue Hignett did this, and we're talking about the width of a bed, the ergonomic 99 centimeters, but I think we need to now grow that a bit more. We're talking about the commode, the turning circle of that commode with 2 carers, possibly plus size again, and then the hoist provision, door openings and hallways. If you haven't seen this, I know it's 2007, but it is a very, very good piece of research by Sue Hignett and co. Seating, which is what primarily we're talking about today as well. So we're talking about what to look for in seating. So we have standing seating tests. Do we have plus size seating tests? Well, it's already been discussed about seat width, weight capacity, but I do talk about static seating and moving, because if you've got a plus size person that is moving in a chair, their weight is changing. Whereas if you've got someone who's static, they're not moving, so their weight. Functionality, is that person able to move in that chair to get their drinks, to get their food, and the stability of the chair, is it well balanced? Are the arms too far out, or can the patient rest them? And is there a surface, in the worst case scenario, that we can put sliding sheets and slings in for that individual? And it took a lot of work, but there are standards for seating, and I'm not sure if they've been updated because these were 2010, and it's about strength and stability. Are we working to those standards, or the new standards are out? Why do we want seating? Well, do you know, sometimes I get phone calls and people say to me, Anita, our plus size person won't go to bed. And I say, well, why? And then you have to understand, well, actually they can't lift their legs into bed. They don't like the bed. It sometimes feels like a coffin. So they'd rather stay in the chair where they stay independent. They can actually get out from the chair, go and make a cup of tea. They can actually use the commode, and it can also help with your care packages as well. It also aids rehabilitation, because we can encourage that individual to get up during the day, do exercises. It's cardiac management. We all know that we've got respiratory, postural management, and if we've got the chair and the cushion and the seating right, we can actually facilitate the pressure care management. So I've already alluded to that 75% of the body weight is taken through the seated area, and that each leg takes up to 15.7%. The research on this from Chaffin is very, very interesting if you want to pick that up. We need to look at the position of the knees and the hips, and we need to look, the majority of the weight should be over the ischials and buttocks. And we need to make sure that the upper half is midline and balanced over the body. So the seating assessment that we try and look at is the patient's body dynamics, this is what we're talking about. The functional space for that person. Can they move in that chair? Can they be functional? Can they actually do the task they want to? Where is the chair being used? Is it going to be used in the lounge? Is it going to be next to a hospital bed? And what environmental constraints? Environmental constraints for me are when the chairs are moved so close to the wall that the actual individual burns the motor out by actually moving the chair backwards. The configuration of the chair. Sometimes you might want 1, 2, 3 or 4 motors depending on the individual's weight. And can that configuration of the chair, which is great because we are now getting so many modular chairs out there where you can swap the arms round, you can increase the depth, you can increase the height, the width, which is really, really good. And then the tissue viability, and especially on the seat elevation. And with the seat elevation, when the seat elevation comes up, some chairs have a gap. If that gap hasn't got a cover over it, if that gap is quite large, you can actually have the potential to squash the legs within that due to the excess adipose tissue that is there. And that is very painful for the person. So when you're looking at the design of the chair, I beg you, please look at how that leg elevation works so that that patient isn't at risk of tissue damage from being trapped as the leg elevation goes down. And the recyclability. So otherwise you can disable that person rather than enable. So challenges. The challenges are the patient's body shape, feet dangling in plantaflexion when sat in the chair in an upright position. Most of them can't bend their legs. So how are you going to manage that? The gluteal shelf I've already talked about. Low seat heights. Some people might need that low seat height to get further back in the chair. The depth of the chair is really important, and having the waterfall allows you to manage that. I've already said about the pannus, pressure on the groins, non-healing tissue damage, cardiac fatigue, but also prescribers' knowledge. When we're prescribing chairs for plus-size people, if we're not sure, ask the suppliers. They are the people that know their equipment. So in essence, wrapping up this is that the right equipment will facilitate patient function, increase independence, and eliminate some of the high-risk tasks in the world of managing plus-size individuals. Overexertion will be caused and patients will be harmed if the equipment is inappropriate and does not work in conjunction with each other. And we know that heavy patient handling increases the risk of cumulative damage. That's me. I hope that has given you some food for thought and that it was beneficial to you today.
Well, that's excellent, Anita. Thank you very much for that. A lot to take in. I'll be looking back through those slides and I'll be reaching out if I've got any questions, and really to encourage everybody else to. There's been lots and lots of questions come through. Appreciate that. If it's okay, what I propose is that the Lento chair related questions, we will be in touch with you directly by tomorrow. But what I'm going to use the opportunity now that we've got Anita on the call is any questions relating to her presentation we will run through now. If I just share my screen. And I will just Sorry, there's a lot of questions I'm scrolling through, just bear with me. I think the first one, if I've got this correct, was in relation to the slide with the lady who had the Apple Palace physical constraints. And the question is this patient's knee fixed under her skirt, or is this her palace?
Which slide was that?
The Apple Palace physical constraints. I think that was the.
Let me.
The 6th slide in, I think, if I've got that right, Anita.
And I just go back to the share the screen. Oh, you've disabled it. Okay. Are you able to?
Yeah, just give me 2 seconds.
You're talking about the lady in the blue dress. This lady.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Was her?
So the question was: is this patient's knee fixed under her skirt, or is this her palace?
No. This is her palace goes down to the floor, and the actual loop you see halfway up is a nodule.
That's great. That's helpful. There was a question from Judy. What is the Flynn tool? Now, 1 or 2 have answered that. Sorry, just for my benefit. And I guess others on the call. What is the Flynn tool, Anita?
It's the mobility tool, function, independent mobility tool. Okay, I can send you the link to that, but I think someone's answered that one for me anyway, isn't it? It's a very, very good tool. I mean, it really is. So the FIM tool is a functional independent mobility tool. And I use it for looking at people's independence. So when I do my risk assessment for plus size people, I use the FIM tool alongside that so that I can bring in their mobility function.
That's great, thank you. A question here from Haley. I've been thinking about safe working load and your comment about doubling the weight for impact weight. Do manufacturers account for this? I'd be interested to hear from you, Anita, on that as to.
I think manufacturers are. I'm not sure if you have with your chair, but with the chairs, it's not so much of a problem, as I said earlier, because you can actually then, it's the beds that worry me. So when I look at beds, I ask what the individual moving parts of the bed, what their safe working loads are, and do it that, and that's how I do it. But manufacturers they should be looking at that, but they can't make beds that take up to 100 stone if someone is 50 stone. So we have to look at the risk assessment and look at how we can sort of not compromise, but put in a system that meets that need, but without over building, if you see what I mean.
Yes, that's helpful. And then Carl followed on with that, speaking about structural loading in properties. I guess that's very important as well to bear in mind. I suppose when being hoisted, so from an overhead hoist system, you wouldn't be unlikely to have impact weight. It would be more really on static pieces of equipment, would you say, or interested
in the environment? Yes, in the environment, we need to look at the loading on the floors. And in most cases, I would hope that people would bring the patient downstairs rather than upstairs. And in high-rise flats, it's difficult, but I mean, in most areas, I know the structural engineers within social services are very interested to get involved because it is a learning curve for them as well. So you can put in plates that actually disperse the loading as well, but advice is downstairs more than as if you can.
And I know for chairs, we've used something like marine ply just to, again, spread the weight more evenly, particularly if it's on a first or second floor, which I think Jess will help answer your question. How would we also find out the structural loading weight allowance? So as Anita said, you know, involve some structural engineers or somebody who can find out that information, would you say, Anita?
Yes, I say social services are really, really good. And you might come back to me and say, well, what about people's own homes? I haven't yet, but then maybe I've been lucky. I haven't yet heard, been told that they wouldn't help me, because they all want to learn as well.
That's great. Haley's asked a question. Did you work with an OT on this case? I think that relates to this case, I believe.
No, I worked with the suppliers. This was a continuing healthcare patient. So this patient would have no social services involvement whatsoever. And as the CHC lead for bespoke equipment and CHC patients, I took this one up.
That's great. A bit more of a product related question here. So from Sophie, any links for sourcing a rise and recline chair with built-in pressure relief system for sleeping on? I'd be glad of your experience and opinion on this, Anita. So in essence, if you take the Lento rise and recline chair, we've got visco foam, gel, or possibility of alternating air, but be glad of your thoughts on a pressure relief system for sleeping.
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it would be down to the patient's safe working load. And it would, I think I go back to the point where we say one size does not fit all, one product doesn't. So it would depend on the patient's tissue viability, risk assessment, whether they actually, because if we do sometimes put in sort of dynamic equipment, pressure relieving equipment like alternating or air filled, we can actually make the patient less independent. Because if you get on some of these pieces of equipment, they tend to be, and they can be unstable. So, in most cases, in a very good memory foam, you've got the hybrid pieces of mattresses and cushions now. So I would be looking, but I would be bespoke to that individual. I would not say that's going to be our norm.
No, absolutely. One size doesn't fit all, particularly from a pressure point of view, does it? There's lots of things to take into account. Question here from Mark. Can you comment on managing shear damage risk to back skin tissue when reclining the back support?
Well, that would be down based on the design of the chair. But what I would be suggesting is that you could actually put sliding sheets in. It's a bit like that shear and friction in bed. And if you put a sliding sheet behind the back of the individual, it reduces that migration and that movement. So I would be saying use sliding sheets where you can, to actually reduce the shear and friction.
That's helpful. And then question from Haley. In terms of the plantaflexion of the feet, what are the solutions?
Oh, fantastic question from Haley. That is really interesting. Well, where do you start? Plantaflexion, you would hope, and this is worst case scenario with the plantaflexion, is that they are past the physio stage. So is there, there is some sort of equipment. I don't know if you sort of look at cushions or wedges and things like symmetric kit or simple stuff works that could possibly help with that and try and support, or put something there to support those planters.
That's great. Well, that's been excellent. Apologies to those who we haven't answered questions on, and we will seek to answer as soon as possible. I think with us being a bit over time, if it's okay, we'll just wrap up with the final few slides. For those of you just on the going back to the chair, if any of you are attending the OT show, we are there exhibiting with it, so we'd be glad to see you on the stand. And of course, if you want to book a demonstration, please just reach out, get in touch. It's certainly no obligation at all. Lastly, I just want to point you to our website. We're building all the time resources on here. So in terms of justification templates, prescription forms, lots of videos. So including the webinars which we've been running, and access to what we've been doing in previous years. Please jump on there, download it. It's free. The resource is yours. We like to share. And if there's anything you feel is missing on there, you know, feed in. We want to build this as a resource to help you guys. So really a big thank you. Big thank you to you, Anita. There's lots and lots of messages coming through. I think it's been very, very useful. I can certainly say that myself. Big learning there. And thank you all for sparing your time this afternoon. We trust it was informative, and we'll just reiterate, we'll get the slides out to you shortly, and we'll seek to answer the questions that we haven't answered, both from the chair, and if there's any more technical queries, if it's all right, Anita, I'll send them your way. And thank you again for joining us.